Question. I want to know how to deal with job dissatisfaction. Is the job against the purpose of our life, or is it just a separate self playing games? Well, it can be both. I've talked about in several videos my playlist on breakthroughs. I've talked about the fact that we have a life plan. And that as spiritual people, we are making this life plan before we come into this embodiment, and it deals with what we want to achieve in terms of personal growth in this lifetime, and what kind of a gift, what kind of a service we want to give to life. And so it is entirely possible that you could have a job right now that isn't aligned with your life plan. And I think many spiritual people can have a sense of that we have a job because we need to exist, we need to make money, we need to pay the bills, but it's not part of our divine plan. It's not really in alignment with our divine plan. And certainly, I've had it myself. I've met many spiritual people who had this. So this can be valid enough that you have this sense. But of course, it's also entirely possible, in fact likely, that we also have one or more separate selves that are playing tricks on how we look at jobs. And so it's important to have a certain balanced view there, where we try to increase our discernment, because you can say it's part of your divine plan to have a specific career, for example. And right now you're having a job that isn't leading you towards those career goals. But still it can be necessary to have that job on a temporary basis. So I, for example, when I was younger, I had many different kinds of jobs. My first job was delivering newspapers. I knew that wasn't part of my career goal in life, but I also knew it was just a temporary thing. Many people, while they're studying, they have a job. Other people, even after they get a degree, they have to take a temporary job just to get started, just to get into the job market. So it's like you can have the short-term perspective where you have a sense, no, this isn't part of my life plan, but you can have a little longer perspective where you say, well, actually it is in a way, because it leads me, it helps me survive, it helps me get to that point. So that's one aspect of it. So it definitely can be valid, but the thing is, what you need to do in order to know what's part of your life plan is that you have to be neutral about it. You have to look at your current job, your career, your outlook for what jobs you might have in the future. You have to look at it neutrally. And in order to look at something neutrally, you have to consider that there might be some separate self that's influencing your attitude towards having a job. When I look back at my life, I can see that I had a certain sense always that I shouldn't work for money. And it doesn't mean I shouldn't have a job, but it means that my work should be part of my service to life. And I should just have enough money coming in from that service that I could continue doing the service. But on the other hand, I have had many different jobs in my life that had nothing to do with, at least directly, serving life. When I was younger, I worked for a year in an iron casting factory, a very dirty job where you were covered in dust and you had to wear a dust mask. When I was in the United States, I was setting up mobile homes, crawling around in the dirt under the mobile homes. I had a sales job, door-to-door salesman, going around selling these framed wildlife prints. I was selling vinyl siding and replacement windows. And so I've had many jobs where I could say, this clearly wasn't leading anywhere to any kind of a career that was part of my service to life. But on the other hand, I had to pay the bills. The kids had to eat, they had to have new clothes, we had to have a roof over our head, and this and that. And so when I look back at it, I can see that I had a certain resentment of this, of having to have those kind of jobs. And it was partly, a little bit part of my family background. I grew up in a working class family in Denmark who had had factory jobs for decades. My grandfather worked in the same factory for many years, so did my father. And there was a certain resentment there. This is just a job, and you just want to get off the job and have free time to do what you want, pursue your hobby or whatever. So I grew up with this sort of a negative attitude to work. And I came to a point where I had to deal with that, and I had to look at it. And I realized in a certain sense that I wouldn't get a better job, a more fulfilling job, until I let go of that attitude. In other words, I couldn't have this prima donna subconscious self that said, oh, this should be beneath me, I shouldn't be doing these kind of jobs. I had to recognize that any kind of job is a job, and you know, I'm not, who am I to be so special that there are certain jobs I shouldn't do? So I actually had to come to a point where I made peace with the job I had, whatever that was. And I just accepted that if this is what I have to do to make enough money to live, that's okay. Because at the same time as I was working, I also had my spiritual goals. So I can look back and say, well, my real career in life has always been my spiritual growth. And so whatever jobs I had was just sort of necessary in order to give me the material means I needed to pursue my spiritual goals. And so therefore it didn't really matter so much what I was doing. And so I can actually see that when I came to a point where I made peace with the jobs that I had had so far, I got a better job. And when I made peace with that, I started working with the masters, and now since 2002, I've been making a living off of doing what I consider my service to life. So what I'm saying is that it's like many times, you know, if we look at our attitude to work and jobs, we can expose these separate selves that we have, that we might have picked up. As I said, I picked it up from my family and culture. And so if we see those cells, if we work on these cells and resolve them, it's very likely that something opens up where we get a job that is more in alignment with our divine plan, or our service to life, and it's more enjoyable and fulfilling to us. But on the other hand, I can also see that the separate selves, it was the separate selves that blocked my sense of fulfillment. Because whatever jobs I had, I could have a fulfillment by doing the job well, and by doing it better than expected, better than the average. So what I'm trying to say is that when I change my attitude so that, let me put it this way, if you have a resistance to something, you can be pretty sure that resistance comes from a separate self. So if you look at the resistance, try to discover the belief behind it. What is it you're resisting? What is it you're believing? Then, by overcoming that separate self, you overcome the resistance, and all of a sudden you can be fulfilled in whatever job you're having. But when you get to that point, it may very well be that suddenly something opens up. I mean, for me, it was simply a matter of seeing an opportunity that I hadn't seen before, and then pursuing that opportunity. You know, so I went from having these manual jobs assembling massage tables to working in an office doing computer work, which I had taught myself in my spare time, and being a technical writer. And that was a big career shift, you could say, or a big job shift. But it was simply because I had made peace with the job I had, and all of a sudden I saw a different opportunity and I pursued it. So I'm just saying, I've seen this in many, many people, that when we are spiritual, everything is part of our learning and our growth. And how do we grow? We grow by overcoming these subconscious selves. And the cells often can be seen as resisting something. There's a resistance. We don't want to have this particular job. We don't want to work. We don't want to deal with children. We don't want to have difficulties. And it's almost like, you know, we have a certain resistance to ordinary life. As spiritual people, in general, we often have this resistance to the mundane, practical things of life. It's a little bit of a, you know, and I see it in myself and I look back, a little bit of a prima donna attitude. And it can come from, for example, we have been monks or nuns in past lives, where we lived in a monastic setting. We could focus all of our time and attention on what we saw as our spiritual goals. But as I've explained before, that was the Piscean age. In the Aquarian age, which we're in now, the goal is that we spiritual people, we live in society, we interact with other people, and we have jobs and careers in society, because we make even that as part of our spiritual activity. So what I'm saying is, and I've seen this in many, many spiritual people, you know, it's like there's a certain resistance among spiritual people. We shouldn't have to have a job. We should just be able to have enough money to pursue our spiritual activities. But that's because we have, as I've said before, this sharp distinction between spiritual and worldly activities. And that's what we have to break down in this Aquarian age, where we overcome that. We overcome the resistance to what we call worldly activities, because we see that they can actually be spiritualized. They can be part of our spiritual growth. And part of our spiritual growth is to overcome the resistance. It's almost like I said, when you come to the point where you're not resisting your current job, something else will open up. It's almost like you could say, you won't get a better job until you make peace with the one you have. And the same applies to Earth. You won't get out of Earth until you make peace with being here. That's a revelation I had many years ago, that I wouldn't be ready to ascend from Earth until I had come to a point where I had made peace with being here, so that I could say, well, whether I ascend or take another embodiment, there's no resistance in me either way. Because I'm not trying to ascend in order to get away from something. In other words, we won't get out of Earth, we won't get away from Earth until there's nothing on Earth we want to get away from. And so the job and our attitude to job is just one way to discover this subconscious resistance we have. But there can be many other things, many other aspects of life where we have this resistance. And it always comes from a separate self. So what I'm saying again, if you are not satisfied with your job, it's most likely because you have some resistance. And if you look at that resistance, you will discover one or more of these subconscious cells. And when you resolve them, you won't have the resistance. That means you won't be dissatisfied with your current job. And very, very often, not always, but very often, that means something will open up that you can't see right now, because the resistance actually blocks our vision.